what we have currently is a budget that does very few of the things we want. Negotiations on the last round of the financial perspectives showed up some deep and systematic flaws of a process which puts maximising returns ahead of adding value, not to mention a rather narrow-minded accounting approach which emphasises winners and losers at the expense of the European interest and fails to provide sufficient automatic annual revenue growth. When we have reformed the budget at all, as in 1984, it became more, not less, opaque, generating a host of rebates, of lump sum payments, of reduced VAT coal rates that could replicate still further as member states demand refunds left, right and centre in the next round of financial perspectives.
We in Europe, we need to be able to equip ourselves with all the means to be able not only to respond and sort of to manage, but to continue indeed to be important actors, economic actors, political actors and social actors in this world. That's the first point. The second point is that when one is looking at the budget as a means, and in particular the EU budget, as a means of meeting some of the challenges, one has to be modest. And one has to be modest because one has to remind ourselves that 97.5% of all public expenditure in Europe are coming through other budget than the EU budget. The EU budget is only 2.5% of all public expenditure in Europe.
How the budget can help Europe deliver outcomes. And a budget for results was actually the title of Mr. Virenkovsky's report on the budget for 2008, and it's an issue which is close to the heart of the Liberals. You can say that the budget instrument is an instrument like legislation, regulation, open coordination, all the other instruments of European Union, but sometimes we tend to forget. And that's why it's sometimes a very good idea to stop up and think back, how could we actually use the budget instrument and use it more wisely in the European Union?
I'm told Lisbon is medium term, it's research, and the social chapter, we mustn't forget the social aspect of Lisbon. It's economic and social, it's very important, and I agree with that. But another factor which I think is missing are areas. You can't have an interterritorial policy which will create large regional areas. You can't just you have to have regional hubs, regional clusters, which will work if you're going to allow Europe to develop or resist global competition.
The issue of juste retour, which would say that the member states should get funding out of the EU budget, which is proportional to how much they put in it. And this could lead to funds being allocated not so much to the best researchers, but more on the basis of nationality. So this would lead to a misallocation of resources. And finally, in what concerns public acceptance, well, surveys show that public opinion is actually largely in favor of having research policy at EU level. The Eurobarometer's polls show that around 70% of citizens support EU action in this area, which is quite high in comparison to the replies given to other areas.
The existing 7-year phasing of the financial perspectives, because the Treaty of Lisbon says that they should be a minimum of 5 years. And it's greatly in the interests of the Parliament that the time should be reduced from 7 to 5 years, so that inside the mandate of each Commission and of each Parliament, there can be a refreshment, a refurbishment of the multi-annual financial framework.
The own resources ceiling is the absolute ceiling of resources available for the Union. The red line here currently at 1.24% of GNI. Interestingly enough, the ceiling of the financial framework, which is constraining the annual budget, has actually declined far below the own resources ceiling. If we take just the year 2008, we have a difference between the blue and the red line of 25 billion euro in just 1 year. So the own resources ceiling at the moment is not a problem. It's not a constraint. The actual budget is far lower than what it could be in terms of own resources ceiling. And the Commission has in fact not proposed an increase in this own resources ceiling in its proposal for 2007-2013 because all its ideas and proposals could be financed within the existing ceiling.
4 weeks ago there was an article in The Economist using this nice term, the end of cheap food. Remember please that for decades we had a persistent terms of trade worsening of agriculture, which had fundamental consequences for EU policy. Basically, the common agricultural policy of the EU is the political response to that. And unfortunately, this policy, as you all know, is defensive, it is expensive, and it is divisive. It is defensive in the sense that it really tries to stem the tide of a worldwide structural change. It leans against the wind of this change.
It seemed that, after all, views very much converge on what is a realistic and reasonable, although never easy way forward. We could say that there is a broad common understanding that a precondition for considerable improvements in the system of EU budget resources are changes on the expenditure side of the EU budgets. We should be aware that the own resource systems has grown extremely complex, precisely due to the problems on the expenditure side. Once the expenditure side reflects better the common priorities of a modern EU, there will be less difficulties in agreeing to changes on revenue side.
I think it's quite clear that the most recent enlargements of the European Union mean that there's a greater need for internal solidarity. If one compares the GDP of the new member states with that of the old member states, one will see that there are huge imbalances which are becoming more and more intense. So that means a need for greater solidarity. But that need for solidarity doesn't stop at our borders. We don't need to distinguish between internal and external policies at all times. That's something that we see. For example, energy policy is not something that stops at the borders of the European Union.
We have, on the one hand, adopted a budget well below the ceilings of the multi-annual financial planning. 1% of GNI in an enlarged 27 member state union is, in absolute figures, a hell of a lot of money, close brackets. But the decisions made have shown that in some areas where, via the budget, we want to provide European added value, we're dealing with chronic adequate funding.
As far as the parts of the budgets are concerned, yeah, we will have to adhere to what is set in the financial perspectives. We have to think about the common agricultural policy. In the financial perspectives, it is also mentioned that the Commission should devote some attention to the possibility of co-financing, whatever it is worth it, but they have to treat it. And we have to talk about the budget rebates in the future. That, I think, are the most important subjects that we have to deal with.